We will talk, I will talk mostly until about 3:15, then we'll take a break, and then we'll go into what's called today Part 2, in which we will discuss the new funding opportunity for mold remediation and development, mold and prevention. So, what's new in 2014? Well, as I've just indicated, there are two categories of funding. There is Category 1, ICDBG for any eligible purpose, and then there's Category 2 for mold remediation and prevention. Another thing that's new is we are going to allocate funds a little bit differently than we have before. Ben will talk about that. Probably a little bit overdue, but we'll talk about that. We're also going to talk a little bit about new ways to determine low and moderate income for thresholds, as well as the rating factors. We are going to talk a little bit about, we've changed the NOFA so that we're going to give a few more points if you've spent your funds in the past quickly. That is something that is being discussed all over HUD and all over Congress. Get the funds out and get the funds spent. We're going to also look at, talk about that we're going to be looking for shovel-ready projects. You may have remembered that was a term that was used in the Recovery Act. We are going to look at that also. And we are also going to talk about if you didn't get funding in recent years, we are going to be giving you points for that. In other words, we want to spread the money around so that the same applicants aren't getting the funds over and over and over again. So, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about what I'm going to call today a few times the regular ICDBG program. That's what we'll talk about today, and then we'll talk about mold at about 3:30. So I welcome you to participate in all the whole afternoon if you can stay with us that long. We will have a break, of course. And what we are not going to do today, because we had to consolidate both parts into one day, is we are not going to be taking questions on the spot today. We will take them afterwards. You all will have an opportunity to ask questions of your area ONAP staff when you, I hope, will go to their trainings that they will be having in the next few weeks. But we'll let you know at the end how to go about doing that. A little bit about what we're going to talk about in Part 1, the purpose of the program, a little bit of an overview. Some of you know a lot about it, some of you don't know too much about it. We'll go over some general parameters. Who's eligible to apply, what you can use the money for, what some of the requirements are, and then there's the old question of how to submit your applications. That's changed a little bit this year. We'll talk about that. We're going to talk about how we will screen your applications, how we will rate them, and then, as I mentioned in Part 2, we'll be talking about the things on the slide in terms of mold and what the NOFA says about mold and where to find the help. So I'm going to just flip my notes here because they got out of order, which is always annoying. But we'll keep going. As I mentioned, there are two categories of funding in this NOFA. You all can apply for and receive both. I keep looking at the wrong camera. You can apply for and receive both categories. So you can apply for a regular ICDBG grant, and you can also apply for a grant for mold remediation and prevention. You can also use both categories for the same project. In other words, if you want to apply for a project and really do away with all the mold and prevent all the mold in all of your housing units, you can apply for both grants to do that. Or you could apply for a public facility grant project with your regular ICDBG and then a mold grant for your mold with the Category 2 funds. However, it is always in the same application. So it's one application for both categories of funding, not one for mold and not one for regular. So that's kind of how it goes. The total we have this year is a little bit more than we had last year, which is quite unusual in this day and age. But Congress appropriated $70 million. They specifically said, you'll see in the last bullet, 10 million of that is for mold remediation and prevention. For single-purpose grants, it's 56 or so million, and then like usual, we will have funds reserved for imminent threat grants, and we'll talk about them a little bit later also. We always like to tell you where the programs come from. This is the statute. Our program comes from the statute that is the same statute for the regular CDBG program that's counties, states, and cities get by formula. We have a set aside of that pot of money. Every year we get some funds and we compete them out. That's the site there. We also have regulation. The ICDBG regulation is listed there. It has not changed much, a little bit here and there in recent years. We may change it soon, but it hasn't changed for many years. So if you have a copy of that from the last few years, you're good to go. Both the statute and the regulation can be found on our website, Code Talk. Occasionally I'll mention where in the regulation something is mentioned, but not often. So what is ICDBG for? You can use it for a lot of things. Basically, the umbrella uses are viable Indian and Alaska Native communities by creating decent housing, suitable living environments, and economic opportunities, primarily for low and moderate income persons. In the slides, you'll see LMI. LMI for this program is 80% of the median income for the area, not for the nation as it is with NAHASTA. What kind of grants? I told you a little bit before, imminent threat grants. They are not competitive. Those grants are awarded as needed. And then there's single purpose grants, which we'll talk about a lot today. So I want to talk today a little bit about imminent threat grants because I don't think in years past we've talked about them. And one of the reasons I wanted to is because we get a lot of questions about imminent threat grants. I think some people think they can be used for certain things and other areas don't even know about them. So imminent threat grants are spelled out in the NOFA. There is no area office allocation. It's a national pot of funds, about almost $4 million. The funds are used to remove imminent health and safety hazards. So not something that has been festering for a long time, not something that has not been dealt with on the tribal or housing authority level. It is for an emergency. And you must meet the criteria that's in the regulation, which is then also in the NOFA too. It has to be independently verified that it's a threat. Often Indian Health Service does that, sometimes the Bureau of Indian Affairs, sometimes other agencies do that. Can't be something that happens year after year after year after year and keeps coming in. Oh, occasionally there's some exceptions to that, but it's not something that's ongoing. It can't just be used to help a house or two. It's got to help an entire service area. And you also have to show, and I think this is sometimes confusing, that there is no tribal or other federal funds that could be used for something like this available. So in other words, you have to try to get funds from other places before you come to us for that. The cap on these grants is $450,000. That's been that for the last few years. However, if the threat or the crisis is in a presidentially declared disaster area, we can fund up to $900,000. So that is something to know. How you apply is you initially contact your area office, then they'll usually ask me if we have any money left, and then you will submit some initial documents to them, and that's spelled out in the NOFA. And then if the area office and we in headquarters agree that you've met the criteria in the NOFA and the regulation, then you will be asked to submit the official forms to get funded. We are now asking applicants to, or folks that get imminent threat grants to, we've spelled out that we want you to be able to spend the money in 2 years. Obviously, there's occasional good cause exceptions for that, but what we don't want to have happen is, what we've seen happen is there was an imminent threat and applicants came in and we gave them a lot of money and then the funds don't get spent. So we're really taking a hard look at that. But again, all of the information for that is spelled out in the NOFA. And here are some examples of some of the things we've done. We've removed asbestos from community buildings. We often use it, or we get requests to use it to improve water systems that have failed. A lot of times there's flooding, and we repair the homes after that. Surprise, surprise, mold remediation is certainly something that can be considered an imminent threat. It depends, but you have to meet the criteria. And then in recent years, we've addressed uranium in wells. So it can be used for a lot of different things. So I want to just point that out to you all because so that you know that the funds are there. You don't have to wait till the NOFA's out. You can apply anytime. You don't have to submit your application by the deadline in the NOFA. You can submit a request to your area office at any time, and if there's funds available, we will process it. Okay, so there's a few new definitions in the NOFA. The NOFA, let me backtrack a little bit. Many of you have looked at NOFAs in recent years, and you'll see that the format of the NOFA this year is quite a bit different. All NOFAs at HUD now are going through a new system. It's a lot of agencies in the country are using it now in the federal government. So it has a different format, but almost all the same language is there. You might have to look around a little bit, but everything should be there. It just doesn't look as nice, I don't think, or maybe I'm just used to the other one. We do have some new definitions in the NOFA. The NOFA has a lot of definitions, and I urge you to look at them all because a lot of times things are answered there. We have a definition now, of course, because we have a new mold program. We've defined it. Mold remediation and prevention is a visible growth of I know I'm going to say that wrong, fungi, I guess, on surfaces. Well, later the folks from EPA will correct me. And we really are looking at long-term solutions. We don't want to be funding, you know, a little bit of paint here and there and a little bit of bleach here and there. We want to really address the cause of the mold in the units, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. And then we want to also look at prevention. Congress did put prevention in the language there when they appropriated the funds, so we want to look at that too. But we'll spend a little bit more time later on that. We're going to talk about, there's a new definition for tribally owned or operated housing. Congress was very concerned that the money for mold go to tribal housing, and so we'll talk about that a little bit later too, but it basically is the definition you see on the slide. It's not private housing. It is, you could have conveyed the house, but it had to have had some HUD assistance previously. However, because mold is an eligible activity under the regular ICDBG program, this criteria does not necessarily apply to those funds, which might make it confusing if you're combining funds, but I wanted to just make that clear. This definition has been in the NOFA for a long time, and points are assigned based on whether you're a current applicant or a new applicant. So you'll see that a new applicant, it's basically been this for years, is an applicant who has never received an ICDBG or whose grants have been closed for more than 12 months prior to the deadline date. So that's prior to July 29th. I don't know if I told you that was when the deadline was, but that's what it is. Okay, I think I'm turning it over to Ben now because he's going to talk about how the funds are allocated to the 6 area ONAPs. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Roberta. So my name is Ben Winter. I work in the Office of Policy Development and Research at HUD. And I'm just going to quickly go over how HUD administers the allocation of the ICDBG funds for single-purpose grants to the area ONAP offices. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about some of the updates to the LMI data that we have that applicants use to demonstrate LMI thresholds and also for the rating factors. So on the single-purpose grant allocations, HUD basically allocates the funding that's available through appropriation to the area ONAP regions through a very simple formula that is spelled out in the regulations. The first step in the formula is to allocate $1 million to each region, and then the remaining portion of the funds that are available are allocated by a formula that's basically 3 simple variables. One is the share of each region's share of tribal population, which has a weight of 40%, its share of persons in poverty, 40% weight, and its share of overcrowded units. And this year in FY14, the allocations resulted in about $4.4 million for the Eastern Woodlands, about $13.3 million for the Southern Plains, and so on in this list. But I wanted to briefly talk about some of the changes that HUD implemented in its strategies for allocating the formula. And we've made these changes so that the allocation actually is better suited to what's in the regulations. So the first change is in FY14, we replaced the old 2000 census data with new data from the American Community Survey, which is a census data product, so that the formula in allocation is better reflecting of current need in the different regions. Secondly, HUD removed state-recognized tribes that are not actually eligible for ICDBG. We removed that data from the calculation so that the formula is better representative of eligibility in the area ONAP regions. So you might ask, what is this ACS? What is the American Community Survey? And just really briefly, just wanted to point out that the ACS is basically the evolution of the old decennial census's long-form survey. Now, this old survey was sent out to a portion of the population, a sample of the full population in 2000, which collected a whole range of information, demographic, housing, socioeconomic information. And from that survey, we've been using that to allocate funds to the area ONAP offices. So the ACS is basically an evolution of that. Instead of sending out this survey to a portion of the population once every 10 years, the census is sampling a smaller share of the full population every year with this new survey, and it's basically producing multi-year estimates. So with the ACS, we have estimates that cover a 5-year period, instead of the old decennial census covered 1-year period. The advantage of moving toward the ACS is that we will be having new data every year in the ICDBG allocation. So if you want more information on details about the formula, including a little snippet of how the formula actually works, you can check out our website here at huduser.org, and hopefully that can answer some of your questions. So now I'm just going to spend a couple minutes to talk about the LMI area benefit. So this year, we made one major change to the LMI data that ICDBG applicants have been using to demonstrate the LMI threshold and for the rating factor in their applications. That one major change is basically the same change that we did with the formula or the allocations. We've replaced the old 2000 data with new ACS, American Community Survey data. And so that's the major change. Now, this year we're also going to be providing a few extra data sets from the very same data source. So that would be different ways to aggregate the American Community Survey that applicants can use if the old way that you've been using the data it doesn't necessarily reflect the need for the application that you're submitting. So let's just go over those options really quick. So the first option we're calling the primary option. It is the old way that you've been looking at with new data. It's basically standard tabulations of the ACS. It's showing the percentage of all people that are LMI in tribal areas. So that should be the most familiar data set that you've been using. We don't have that uploaded on the website yet, but hopefully we'll have that uploaded by the end of this week. And then we're providing two extra options, right? So let's say that you're applying for a project that is really not going to serve all people in a particular area, in your tribal area. It's only going to be serving AIAN households or tribal members. If that's the case, then we're also providing two additional data elements that you can use that show the portion of the households in your tribal area that are LMI, the portion of your AIAN households that are LMI. And within that, you have two options. So you can show the portion of AIAN alone that are LMI, or the portion of AIAN households in combination with other races that are LMI. And then we're also providing a few other data sets for you to use if you are going to be applying for a project that is really only targeting a very specific neighborhood instead of the whole tribal area. So these are basically 3 different options. The first one is, again, the standard LMI populations at the neighborhood level for, it shows the percentage of people that are LMI, and then we'll do another option that shows the percentage of AIAN households that are LMI, and then the percentage of AIAN in combination with another race that are LMI. So again, these extra data sets aren't meant to be confusing. I know it can be confusing, but they're really meant to show that we're trying to be more flexible in giving you all data that you can use to show the need that's very unique to the applications that are coming in. So, but again, we're planning to upload the same kind of data that you've been using before. We'll upload that hopefully by the end of this week. And then we'll have all these other data sets for you to use if you need. And also there's the last option here is the applicant generated data, which Roberta will talk about in a second. But I just wanted to highlight that we're going to be diving deeper into the LMI data on July 2nd. It's an additional training that we'll be giving. And by the end of this week, all the different data sets will be available for download at our huduser.org website. Right now, we have the neighborhood level data uploaded, but soon we will upload the tribal area. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Roberta to talk to you about applicant-generated data.
Thank you, Ben. And I do think that a lot of the information, if you've all looked at that website, it was a little bit confusing to me too, which is why I begged Ben to come down here and talk. I think a lot of you will end up using the option 1, which is the primary database, low and moderate income and what you've been using and what the area offices have provided you in the past. But if you want, you can use the other data. And so we're giving you a lot more option here, and I think that will be great. And I know it will be useful to some of your regions more than others, but we will have that up, and we will send something out to the area ONAPs about when that training will be on the 2nd. It will be, available to all tribal and to all applicants, but we will let you know as soon as we know what time that'll be. So thank you, Ben. I know Ben has to go deal with some other statistical issues right now. And he didn't want to sit through the rest of my webcast. I don't know why. So he's going to segue out, and I'm going to talk about the option that we've always had. We'll talk a little bit about it more. Thank you, Ben. We'll see you on the 2nd. What's been in the regulation and in the NOFA for years is another option. And I know a lot of you have used this because, in part, the data we've been giving you in recent years, or that's been available in recent years, has been very old. You always can do your own survey. You can submit your own data, but it has to meet certain criteria. It has to be on the slide, collected systematically, be able to, be able to be verified. If you need to differentiate between reservation and BIA service area population, it also must have the number of people that will benefit from the project and the number that are low and moderate income. We need a sample copy of the survey form. We need an explanation of the methods used to collect it. And then we need a listing of incomes by household and size. Now, it seems like a lot. And maybe with the new data, a lot of you won't need to do this, but a lot of applicants lose points because they either don't do the survey right or they don't submit all of the information. If the NOFA asks you for this, all those little dots there, you must submit them or you will not get credit for part of it. So it's really reading every sentence and every line in the NOFA, and if you have questions, ask your area ONAP, and go to their trainings. But I know that's been a tricky issue. We try to provide guidance over the years, and I know some of the offices have, but I'm hoping that you won't need to do your own data surveys this year quite as much because we'll have new data. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the other things in the NOFA. There are grant ceilings in the NOFA. They apply to the entire application. So I don't think I have them listed on the app. Yes, I do. They're coming up. They're one of the screening factors. If you propose even if you propose an application that is $1 over, $10 over, we'll throw it out. You cannot be funded. That is the cap. Here they are. They have not changed from recent years. For the 4 regions on the screen, that is the grant ceiling that has been for years. For the next 2 regions, it's based on population. Now, the NOFA also provides an opportunity if you think that the population is bigger, the tribal population that resides on the reservation is bigger than statistics show, you can talk to your area office before the application, and you want to make sure that you do that before and not assume that they're going to know that that's what you wanted to do in your application. Within the grant ceiling, you can apply for more than one application. Some of the bigger tribes submit 4 or 5 projects. They may be different, they may be for the same thing, but in different regions. It depends on how big your big the grant is. You can submit an application for 2 housing projects. You can submit an application for a public facility and an infrastructure project. But again, that has to fall below the the grant ceiling. If you're proposing a health center, for example, and several tribes are going to benefit from it, you can combine the ceilings. The NOFA specifically spells that out, that if there's a tribal organization, a nonprofit, eligible, it must be eligible. As long as all members of the several tribes are going to benefit, you can apply for a grant that's bigger than the individual ceiling in that particular case. Those are a little bit trickier, so if you have questions about that, attend the training. Call your area office beforehand. Now, as I mentioned, there's 2 categories this year. Category 1 for any kind of ICDBG activity. Category 2, mold remediation. If you're funded under both categories, in other words, you can get up to the maximum. We're not going to reduce your second grant because you got the first grant, but you cannot get more than the combined ceiling of both. There are housing rehab cost limits. These have not changed much. We usually touch base with the area offices every year. I think only Southwest has increased this year. This doesn't mean that that's all you can spend on housing, your rehabbing the housing units you want to fix up. It's what we will pay for. Again, those have not changed that much, but you have to spell out in your budget that this is what you will spend. I wanted to also say here that if you get funded under the mold portion too, if you get a category grant, you still cannot exceed the rehab caps here. So you could get 2 grants, but you can't spend in Alaska you can't spend $70,000 in Southern Plains. You can only spend $35,000 of ICDBG money on that particular unit. Okay, that's a little bit different and a nuance now. If you're funded, you must comply with every single thing in the ICDBG regulation. You must comply with things in the NOFA. You must and any in the statute, of course, but that's spelled out in the regulation. And the regulations apply to both categories of funding. And if you accept the grant, if the chief executive officer signs it, they will agree to this, and they will agree to be the status of the responsible federal official for the environmental review of the project also. So that's pretty much the same. Now, there is a lot of eligible applicants spelled out in the NOFA. This is regulatory language. Tribal organizations can apply if they're eligible under Title I of the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act. You must have a letter from the BIA or Indian Health Services that says you are a tribal organization. However, if your organization has applied for funds in the past or has submitted such a letter in the past, you do not have to submit that letter again. We do have it on record that you have, so you don't have to send it. And in Alaska, if a tribal organization is submitting an application for activities for several tribes, you must have a concurring resolution from all of the tribes, from each tribe, authorizing the submission of the application. And then in Alaska, I'm sure that the Alaska folks, some of you know, the funding priority is the IRA Council, the Traditional Village Council, the ANCSA, I know there's a way to say that, Village Corporation, and the ANCA Regional Corporation. And every year, BIA, as you know, publishes a list of entities that are eligible to receive services from BIA. The last one was published in January 29th of this year. We do refer to that, and we look at that to see tribal eligibility and names. The period of performance, sometimes this is a little bit confusing. We have regulations that spell out how long ICDBG funds can be out and available for use for. We also ask you, when you submit your application, we'll talk about this a little bit later, to submit an implementation plan. So in other words, if you say it's going to take you 3 years, that's what we're going to hold you to. It is required under rating factor 1. But the NOFA has a specific period spelled out in here that says that implementation schedule cannot exceed September 30th, 2021. I know it sounds like it's a really long time away, but some of you may know that as you near the end of this 7-year period, we will contact you and say, where is the money? Have you spent the money? If you haven't spent the money, we will recapture the money. We do not like to recapture money. We like the money to be spent for the purposes it was asked for, but if we have to, we have to. And we will maybe recapture the funds sooner. As I mentioned earlier, it is something that's discussed over and over here, that we do not like money. Congress does not like money sitting there when it seems like it could be spent. So that's that. There is no match requirement in ICDBG like there is in some other federal programs. However, you can get points in rating factor 4 if you leverage other funds. We'll talk about that later. You also can use ICDBG as a match for other programs. So that's good to know, because, well, there's the juggling act of matching them up, but that is something that's good to know. There are threshold requirements. What's a threshold requirement? Well, if you don't meet it, you don't go any further. So there are a lot of thresholds that HUD has for any HUD program. They are all spelled out in what is called the general section. That's the short term for a document that is called the general, for HUD's Notice of Funding Availability Requirements and General Section to HUD's Fiscal Year 2014 NOFAs for discretionary programs. It's a mouthful. We call it the general section. That was published on February 19th of this year. It is posted on grants.gov and also on the HUD grants page. There was a technical correction posted on May 6th of this year that basically rearranges what is or isn't a threshold. I'm probably gonna just highlight some of the thresholds and some of the requirements, but there are some thresholds that you must meet. There are also program-related thresholds in our program, just our program. And then when we get down a little further, there are project-specific thresholds which apply to the type of project that you are going to be working on. If you don't meet these, you don't go any further, so you won't even get points. You have to meet the thresholds, all of these thresholds. So what are the thresholds? In the general section, I urge you all to at least look at that. It's long. I have it here. I'd waive it, but I can't have a lot of paper on the table. If you're you have to be an eligible applicant. If you're not, you won't get funded. Individuals cannot get funded, for example. You have to meet the eligibility criteria. If you have any unresolved civil rights matters, you will not get funded. Doesn't usually apply to tribal entities, but you never know. HUD has made the third bullet here a threshold. I think we're going to have to flesh this out a little bit more, because the It's called Section 3, and some of you may have heard about it. It is a requirement that's been on the HUD laws for a long time, since actually 1968, and it was intended to provide jobs to people that were in areas that were receiving HUD assistance. Well, there is an exemption for, sort of an exemption. In other words, if tribes have their own programs that are providing, that benefit Indians and they're providing job training, Section 3 would not have to be met. You'd use the tribe's process. That's a little bit vague, but this is a new threshold, and I think we might need to provide a little bit more guidance on it. But I wanted to flag that because that is there now, and we will collectively, internally, within the staff, be looking at that a little bit. There's a few others on the page. They're there. We don't really talk about them too much in the ICDBG NOFA. And then there's non-discrimination. Some of the civil rights acts do apply to tribal entities. Affirmatively furthering fair housing does not. So, but there are special rules that apply to us. So again, this is all spelled out in the general section. I urge you to look at that. You won't have to specifically say this in your application, but I raise it so you know that if you get the grant, some of these things are going to apply to you. There are a lot of other HUD requirements. I know it seems like there's repetition. I thought the same thing. Let me go back a little bit here. Okay. There's a lot of other requirements. These are all spelled out in the general section. If you have any delinquent federal debts, you got to pay them off before you get funded. We're going to make sure you haven't been debarred. You can't lie on your application. And there's a new thing called the Do Not Pay website. Again, you do not have to say anything about these in your application, but I wanted to highlight them because these are things that will apply if you're about to get funded. You might not get it if some of these things apply. We're also going to ask you for a code of conduct. If you don't have one on the HUD website, the HUD website is in the general section also. You have to submit it with your application. We'll talk about that a little bit. There's also a prohibition against lobbying. It only applies to state tribes, so most of you won't have to worry about that. And there's a conflict of interest provision in here that is a general conflict of interest provision. I wanted to talk about, I'm not quite sure. Oh, here I go. They added a new requirement in here. It's the second bullet, and it is a bullet about equal access for sexual orientation, gender, and marital status. And in the general section, they do say that they want to make sure that all HUD's programs are open to all eligible individuals and families, regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, or marital status. And you have to comply with 24 CFR 5105A2 when you determine eligibility for your programs. I mentioned that. Again, you're not going to have to submit that in your application, but that is a new one. So that's the first time you might have seen that in the general section. There are faith-based rules, and many of you may know that if you use federal funds to displace people, you have to provide alternative housing for them. The Uniform Relocation Act does apply to our programs. Some more rules and requirements. If you are funded and HUD wants to evaluate the funds that you received, you must participate in that. This will probably come into play a little bit more so with the mold grants, but we'll talk about those. So you have to comply with environmental requirements. That is not new. What is new on this slide is some new OMB requirements. OMB consolidated all of its OMB circulars into one big omnibus regulation. They've published it. It's called Guidance for Uniform Administrative Requirements, Cost Principles, and Audit Requirements for Federal Awards. They will supersede those circulars. HUD is going to implement its regulations to implement those, and we'll probably have regulations out by December 26th of this year. So if you're funded under this round of ICDBG, you will be required to comply with these regulations when they become effective. But not before they are effective. So I just wanted to flag that. Again, we will probably have guidance on that, but again, heads up, something else new to learn. Drug-free workplace, you have to keep your files safe. The last two bullets have been in the general section for a long time. Again, requirements, I haven't seen too much guidance on them. If you are about to be funded, what we will do is we will do a name check. We will make sure that your DUNS number matches your tax ID number. We will do some checks before you're funded. There will be a do not pay. There's a lot of checks now, you'll see. Again, you do not have to submit any of these things with your application. These are things that will come into play if you're about to be funded or while you're not funded. Okay, those are the omnibus HUD thresholds. So now, let's go to ours. If you have any ICDBG money that you have not paid back, that you are required to pay back through enforcement action or otherwise, you will not be funded. You also, if there are any civil rights violations, you will not be funded. Again, I don't think that's going to apply too much to our program, but that's there. Program thresholds, not too many. Now, there are project thresholds, as I mentioned earlier. Not every type of project has them, but if the type of project you are applying for does have them, you must meet these. And you must meet all components of these, not just one part of it. The first bullet, it's everything. We're going to discuss each of these in turn. If you're doing a housing rehab project, this will apply to the mold projects also, this particular threshold. You must have housing rehab standards and policies adopted before you submit the application. You don't have to submit them, but we want a resolution or a statement that the tribe has adopted them. We also need you to demonstrate or say that if you are going to use HUD funds to rehabilitate HUD housing, the homeowner's payments are current, or that they're in a repayment agreement. There can be an exception for that sometimes, but you have to check with the area office on that. If you're rehabilitating housing with ICDBG funds, all the units that get ICDBG funds have to be occupied by low and moderate income households. And if there are 2 or more units in a household, you must, 51% must be occupied by low and moderate income. New housing construction. When Congress authorized the CDBG program, they really didn't want it to be used for new construction. So there were a lot of criteria and carve-outs for that, or exceptions, or they didn't want it to be used for that. Same thing applies to ICDBG. You must jump through a lot of hoops in order to be able to use this pot of money for new construction. Only a community-based development organization, which is a term of art from the CDBG reg, CBDO, only an entity that can meet the criteria for that, which we'll go into, can actually be doing the new construction. You also must have tribal construction standards. You must have a tribal resolution about that. The NOFA now does say that it has long said that it had to meet minimum property standards, and there's some language in there about what that meant. But now we also are saying that at minimum it has to meet the Section 8 housing quality standards. Those are not really, really strict standards, but it does specify that. Again, you don't have to submit the resolution. I'm reading my notes here, but you have to have a resolution that shows that they have been adopted. So, what else? Remember I said this one has a lot of criteria. You have to show that there's no other housing in the area that your tribal residents could live in. You also have to show that there's no other sources including ICDBG, that could be used to build this housing, that you can't rehabilitate any housing there, that the households you want to help are either homeless, overcrowded, which in many tribal areas is going to be the case, or the household has no current residence. I said that. So you have to meet all of those criteria, not some, all. And then again, all the units that are occupied, if you pass the tests and can build the housing, have to be occupied by low and moderate income. And again, 80% of the median for the area. Economic development is a type of project that we do not see too many applications in, and I think in part because a lot of the criteria is a carryover from the CDBG regs, but we also want to fund projects that we think have a good chance that they'll be successful. So for this type of project, for your threshold, you must submit a financial analysis, and you have to be able to demonstrate that the project is financially feasible and has a reasonable chance of success. You don't have to guarantee that it will be a success or that it's 100%, but that it is a reasonable chance that the type of business or development project you want to do, it has a reasonable chance. There'll be more criteria later on that. You also have to show that so a little bit more about that. You want to look at, in some cases this will apply, not always, but the type of thing that you could include in such a study, a feasibility analysis. What's the market share? What's the growth potential? What are your projections of revenue, project expenses, debt service? There's all sorts of models out there in terms of how to do a financial analysis, feasibility plan. You have to show public benefit. In other words, you have to show that what you get from us to do this project is proportional to the funds. In other words, the more money you request from us, the greater the public benefit you can demonstrate, so that you must, again, this implies that there's got to be some other leverage there. You also have to show that your grant will not reduce non-federal funds. In other words, this grant will not replace other funds that are being used for such a facility. Again, not more than a reasonable rate of return, and that the funds from this grant will be dispersed on a pro rata basis with funds from other sources. It's different than a lot of the other projects that we fund with ICDBG, but we do fund them. I don't have the number that we funded over the years, but we do fund these type of projects. But this is a threshold that must be met. If you have any questions about it, I think there is one successful economic development project posted on our website. I will double check that, or when we get to that, I'll talk about that. But I do know that each office has probably funded a few, so there are some models out there. So it is used and it is done, but it's not too often. If you're proposing a home ownership project, or you're buying land to build housing on down the road, or you're going to do a micro enterprise, or you're building a community center, there are no project thresholds. So that's one hoop you don't have to jump through. But obviously there are other criteria if you do that. But at least you don't have to meet the threshold. So in other words, if you meet the initial, if you've submitted everything you're supposed to submit, you don't have any ineligible things against you, you will then proceed right to rating and ranking on these type of projects. You can use ICDBG for public services, to provide job training, to provide English as a second language class, well, whatever. May not be applicable right now. But it can only be 15% of the total grant request. So it could be totally unrelated to the other part of your grant request, but it can only be 15%. And it has to be a new service. In other words, if you just stop funding something, you can't just say, oh, well, we need the money now. It has to be a new service, or you're going to serve more people with this money. Again, it can't be a standalone project. If I did say it doesn't have to be related. Housing counseling, drug abuse education. If your application does not receive full funding, HUD will reduce the public, and you've asked for public service funds, HUD will reduce the amount proportionately, so it would give you a little bit less, but it would, so that it won't be more than 15%. Okay. ICDBG is one of the programs that can be used for not every single thing, but it can be used for a lot of things, a lot more than any other program that I know at HUD. Maybe the CDBG program. All of the eligible activities are spelled out in that regulation. The NOFA pretty much parrots those, but again, if you have any questions, go look at that. It's on our website. They're also spelled out in the NOFA here, and then the types of activities are also spelled out in rating factors 2 and 3. So what do most people use ICDBG for? Housing rehabilitation. It's pretty easy to do. A lot of folks know how to do it because they're doing IHBG housing rehab. Land, you can use it for land acquisition. A lot of people do that. And then the second year they get the housing money and they build the housing. Home ownership counseling. Public facilities improvements. I think that category of funding as well as infrastructure are the most requested things. Economic development, we've discussed very few. Micro enterprises, too bad, very few, but we have funded some of them. This slide lists a lot of other types of activities, and the NOFA spells this out as well. We say, well, okay, acquisition of property. You can propose that as land or other real property to support new construction, housing rehab, public facility. You can acquire land for those things in conjunction with those things. You can use it for clearance and demolition. We don't see applications just for that, but you can use it as part of other things. You can use it for comprehensive planning, but there is a cap on that. We'll talk about that. It's 20%. You can use it to abate lead paint. You can use it for match, and as we've discussed earlier, mold remediation. Okay. As we discussed earlier, new housing construction can only be implemented through the CBDO. I'm looking at my definition of CBDO, but that's not really going to help us too much here. But let's go into the criteria. There are 3 options for defining a CBDO in the NOFA and in the regulations. Again, a lot of this language is taken from the CDBG program, which is city, urban, but a lot of it is still going to apply, and obviously, people have been using ICDBG for this, so some of you have been able to do that. You have to be organized under state or local law, tribal law, nonprofit. You must have a primary purpose to improve the physical environment, economic or social environment. 51% of the board must be low and moderate income residents of the area. Cannot be an agency or an instrumentality of the grantee. It's got to be separate. CBDO must be free to contract for goods and services from vendors of their own choosing. So there are some criteria spelled out there in option 1. I paraphrased, it's a lot more detailed. If you're thinking of this, you need to look at these. Option 2, if you're an SBIA, Small Business Investment Act entity, or an SBA approved entity, a lot of things spelled out in here. Or if you're a CHODO under the home program, I don't think that's going to apply too much in most tribal areas. Or if you're a tribal lead-based community development nonprofit, that might be the one. And is organized to promote and undertake community development activities on a nonprofit basis. So that's one. Option 3, similar to option 1 and 2. It has all the characteristics of 1, but what does that say? Oh, but can't find a board. That doesn't make sense. But you'll see on the slide that TDHEs or Indian Housing Authorities are not automatically considered a CBDO. So don't just assume that just because you have one, that is going to be the entity. You must be verified that you are eligible to be doing these things under this criteria. So what kind of housing rehab can you do? And my engineer in the studio keeps telling me to look at the right screen. A lot of things. You can use it for privately owned buildings. You can improve single-family homes. You can fix up manufactured housing. I mean, the world is kind of your oyster here, to use an overused phrase. You can use it to improve energy efficiency. HUD would like that. You can use it to connect water sewer lines. You can lead paint, we've talked about, acquire tools. A lot of these things are listed in the regs. So if look at the list, and maybe there's something in there that you use the funds for. Code enforcement, more of an urban thing perhaps, but that is something. Fire and home security, carbon monoxide detectors. Anyway, lot of things spelled out in there. You can also use it for land. You can acquire land in conjunction with a housing, public facility improvement, and economic development project. You can only acquire land alone as a standalone activity for future housing development. You have to show that if you can't just buy any land, you can't buy a land on a brownfield or a Superfund site. It has to be, you have to show that the proposed site has suitable soil conditions for new construction and infrastructure. Potable drinking water is accessible at a reasonable cost, has vehicular access, there's services nearby, and no known environmental problems, thus the brownfield. This is spelled out a little bit more in rating factor 2. What can you use it for in terms of home ownership? Again, low and moderate income households. You can use it to subsidize interest and principal, acquire guarantees, but you cannot actually provide the guarantees. You can provide it in down payments, help with closing costs, and it is a standalone activity. This is not considered a public service, homeownership assistance, so you are not then subject to the cap if you provide these kind of services. It's a separate kind of a program. Public facilities and improvements, a lot of community facilities can be used for homeless shelters, transitional shelters. We've had a lot of interest recently at HUD headquarters about Head Start facilities, daycare centers. If you look at the list of projects that have been funded with ICDBG over the years, that is posted on our own app Code Talk website. If you go to the tab that says ICDBG, over there on the right-hand side, there's a list of a lot of the, I think for the last 3 or 4 years, we've published the list of awards in the that were announced in the Federal Register, and you'll see they are summarized there, and you'll see a lot of daycare centers, Head Start centers, infrastructure. You'll see what people use them for, and they're very summary descriptions, but you'll see it can be used for that. Battered spouse shelters, halfway houses for runaway kids, youth centers, group homes, water, sewer. You cannot use ICDBG to purchase equipment in most cases, except for construction equipment for a solid waste facility or fire equipment. That is specifically spelled out as a permitted activity. So with economic development, what could you do? You can acquire structures, you can acquire buildings, you can provide assistance to for-profit and nonprofit organizations for economic development. You can, a lot of people use ICDBG funds to do convenience stores, gas stations that are combined with stores, travel stations, motels, seed money for startups. So there's a lot of options there. Again, look at the list of who got funded for what, and you'll see who did what. Maybe they'd give you some tips. Micro enterprises. Again, I've done work on micro enterprises before I came to HUD, and I was delighted to see that this was an eligible activity. We do not see very many of these projects. We have seen some, micro enterprises, to help people start their own businesses, get training on how to start businesses. The regulation in the NOFA does define a person developing micro enterprises. Means a person who has expressed an interest in and is expected to be actively working toward developing businesses. You can provide technical assistance for people starting businesses, counseling, childcare, transportation while they're learning about setting up business. So there's a lot of things there. They're, again, a little bit more complicated, perhaps, than a housing rehab project or building a water line, but it can be used for this. Government facilities, we get questions about this periodically. Can I fund a court building? Can I fund a police station? There are some specific criteria for that. It depends on where the services are provided. You can do a jail and a library and a police station, but you cannot fund a government headquarters. You cannot fund a courthouse or a local government office. And I'll read you some examples because I think these are key. For example, buildings used for activities such as planning and administration of the ICDBG program would be considered buildings for the general conduct of government and would be ineligible. However, buildings used to deliver services to the public would not be ineligible. A police headquarters building would fall within the definition of building for the general conduct of government and be ineligible, but a police station or jail would not. In some cases, nonprofit entities or subrecipients, including CBDOs, could acquire title to facilities in which some government services are provided. However, in such cases, they must be open for use by the general public during all normal hours of operation. These are tricky projects. If you have any questions or think you want to do a type of facility like this, touch base with your area ONAP. There is a memo. It's old, but there is a memo that explains a little bit better. We can explain that to you. But again, don't assume it's going to be eligible or ineligible. Touch base with them. Okay, let me just check my time. Okay, we're good. How to apply. Oh, did I forget to say this? Oh, okay, ineligible activities. Okay. Cannot use it for maintenance and operation. Again, we talked about new construction. No personal property, no furnishings, no tools, no equipment. You cannot use it to pay rent. There's a little bit of an exception in there for some emergencies, but just assume you cannot be using it to pay people's rent payments, et cetera, like that. So, how to apply. Many of you that have applied for ICDBG in the past know how much fun it is to apply electronically. But in the past several years, I think most people are getting the knack. Now, of course, there's new changes every year with grants.gov. There's new changes every year with everything. And this year is no different. Where can you find information about how to apply? You can find it in the general section. It's in section 4 now. You can find it in ICDBG NOFA, also in section 4. We do not repeat everything from the general section in the ICDBG NOFA. We try to just give you the salient sections there. But I did want to let you know that the information that is now available on the grants.gov website is much more detailed. Maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Well, I'll talk about that a little bit later. Again, I urge you to look at the general section, in particular for the HUD policy priorities, which we'll talk about later. Applications must be submitted electronically via grants.gov unless a waiver is granted. We'll talk about how to get that waiver later. But we've loosened it a little bit in terms of how long you have to request that waiver, but I urge you to start on the electronic application process now. We did send out a program guidance to all tribal entities several months ago because we knew the NOFA was going to be delayed, and we urged you all to make sure that you have your registrations up to date, your passwords, everything ready to go so that when you are ready to submit your ICDBG application, you don't run into problems, which is like so frustrating. There's a lot of technical assistance available for submitting electronic applications. The general section has some. The grants.gov help desk, the phone number is on that slide. They are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, except federal holidays. You can send an address to the address on the slide if you're having trouble submitting electronically, or you can call them. I did go over the grants.gov website myself recently just to see what has changed, and I must say it's a lot easier to navigate than it used to be. It has so much information there. You might say maybe a little bit too much information, but there are a lot of helpful tools there, frequently asked questions, how to apply, troubleshooting. Whoever's going to be submitting the application should look at that now so that you are ready to press the button, not the last day. The next slide talks about where you find the application. You can find the application. You can find what you need to submit your ICDBG application in a lot of different ways. You can find it by going to grants.gov, and let me see if I'm going to get a little bit ahead of myself here. I don't know. You can go to the HUD website. That's the first bullet on the page. You can, which might then link you back to grants.gov. You can search on grants.gov by agency. I find that's the easiest because HUD doesn't have that many NOFAs up now. And it's a lot faster than scrolling down through every single federal NOFA. You can also, the second bullet here is the webcast that you're watching now, I think. Just so you know, this website, this webinar will be archived within a few days on this website, and the slides will also be posted within a day or two. So even though you don't have them right now, you will be able to have them. There is also a link on the screen here, the last bullet. As I mentioned earlier, there is a place to go to look at successful ICDBG applications. I think they're up until 2011, but it might be worth looking at that. Some of the area offices, area ONAP offices, have some successful applications posted, and if you go to their trainings, you'll find out about those too. But anybody can go to any area ONAP office website and look to see who got funded. What HUD asks us to do every year is give us the highest scoring application. So while there may be other successful applications on this particular website, it's the highest scoring one that year. If you've downloaded your application from grants.gov, you've downloaded the NOFA, you've downloaded all the forms you need. Also, when you're going to the grants.gov website to download, the application package, you also need to look there at the housing needs table. The housing needs table is what you will refer to when you are applying for a housing project, but we'll get to that a little bit later. But that is also posted with the grants.gov NOFA, on grants.gov. We always tell people to call, let's say it's a couple days before the application deadline, which this year is the 29th of July at 1 minute before midnight. If you are applying a couple of days before this date or that very day and you are running into problems, I will be at the office. But your first course of action is to call the grants.gov help desk. They are there 24 hours a day. If you cannot get help through them, you call me and we will work with the grants office here on the 3rd floor to get you to the grants.gov folks, to get your application in, if you can. Now, if you don't have passwords that are current, if you haven't registered, we'll talk about it a little bit later, then we're not going to be able to help you, but we might be able to. So call the help desk first. We cannot help you write your application. We are under strict orders by Congress. We cannot assist in any kind of activity like that. We can tell everybody the same thing about the NOFA, which is what we're doing now, which is what the area offices will do, but we cannot tell you if you should do this or should do that, or apply for this or apply for that, or fill out a form this way. Some general parameters we can do, but we cannot help you write your application or give advantage over any other applicant. So what do you have to do? Again, if you've applied electronically in the past, this will be familiar. You first need to get a DUNS number, and I didn't write down what that stands for, but I know I should know, but you need a DUNS number. You have to register with SAM, which is the new Central Contractor Registration. It is the System Award for Management. You need to register with that entity. You have to register with grants.gov. You have to create an account in grants.gov. You have to grant somebody the point of contact authority to submit your application. And then you should also become very familiar with the way to check that you have submitted your application, it has gotten through. Because what's going to happen is you will submit your application. They will send an email address to the person whose name they've been given. A lot of times what happens is the person whose name is on that form doesn't know that their name is on it, or they don't have grants.gov in other words, their email won't accept emails from grants.gov. So you might get an email from grants.gov that says, not validated, rejected because of this, and you'll not get it. This happens over and over and over again. Make sure that you follow all of the steps in on the grants.gov website, and make sure that all the people that are going to need authority to submit the application know that they have it and also are registered and able to do that. I cannot emphasize that enough, because there's a lot of steps. It's not just the grant writer writes the grant and throws it in the mail. I use fountain pens. Everybody knows that. I wish that it were so. It would be a lot easier for a lot of us. But that's not how it goes. So don't do yourself a disservice and forget to do some of these things early on. That's always so sad. So again, we talked a little bit about how to download the application. What I do is I go to grants.gov, I browse by agency, I see, oh, there's ICDBG, and I click on it, and I click on the full application, and I download everything. You can download the application more than once, but if you download it more than once, in other words, you have to use there's a fax form that comes with it. So you want to make sure that you're using in other words, you've downloaded it once, you're using all the forms that came with that particular download. You also are going to need to have, well, let me just say that, okay. You're also going to need to have Adobe Reader. What's happened over the years is grants.gov was using an older version of Adobe Reader, and we'd get calls saying, why can't I use the one I have, which is newer? Well, they've resolved that, and what you'll see on the slide now is a link to check to see if the Adobe that you have is compatible with the Adobe that they will accept. I think they go up to 11 something now. Last year it was 9 point something, or at least in the webcast. Look at that now. Make sure that you can do it now even before you're submitting the application, but make sure that when you're about to go, your forms are going to be acceptable to grants.gov. When you go to grants.gov and you look for ICDBG, you will see that there is a technical correction there. Don't panic. Don't have a heart attack. We noticed a few days ago that some of the points in the mold section of it, we had to change the NOFA quite a bit to address the new funds for mold. So for category 2, the mold numbers weren't exactly right in terms of how many points you got for this or this or this. That's the only thing that changed. So when you go to grants.gov, you're certainly welcome to look at that and download that one. But if you're not applying for mold, you don't even have to bother. If we notice any other glaring mistakes, actually I found another number that was off today, we may go in and fix that. Probably is good to look at the last version, but I didn't want people to panic to say, oh my God, I've already started reading the first one, and oh my goodness, now I have to read the second one. You don't, unless you're going to be applying for a mold grant, and then there's only one little section in section rating factor 3 that has changed, and the chart has the numbers right now. So I wanted to just point that out. So again, when is the application due? July 29th. I think that's a Tuesday, maybe it's a Thursday, but it is due right before midnight. Not 2 minutes after on the 30th, not 5 minutes after. You must make sure you get the confirmation that your application got through and was validated. make sure that you're allowing enough time. I know we always say this, and I wish we could have given you all 9 months, 90 days to submit your applications. But because the NOFA was so late this year, in part because of the new system we're using internally at HUD, and also because of the new mold funds we needed to get approval about, we did not want to, we wanted to be able to get the money out to you as soon as we can, and that's why we have 45 days. It's basically 45 days you will have to submit your application. And then we have very few days to review it. There is a grace period. I almost wish there wasn't a grace period, because I think sometimes people think, oh, well, I have a grace period, I don't have to worry. If you don't assume you have the grace period, there are some narrow criteria about that grace period. You have had to already been in the system before that cutoff point, and you have had to received a rejection notice. Then you have another day to get your information in, 1 day. All the more reason to have the correct person's email in there. So the correct person is, and you can, I think you can have more than one in there. You don't want to have that person be on vacation. We have that happen a lot of times. Make sure that the person that needs to know about the application is the person that is on there, and we'll get the notice. Just hitting the sign and submit button doesn't mean you are going to get through. You will get a tracking number, print it out, keep it. If you let's say you apply a week before, or even a couple days before. If you don't get a validation or a rejection notice that said you made it through or you didn't, then you need to call the grants.gov help desk, which is the phone number, I think, to come, and on the last, anyway. Okay. If you don't understand the error message that you get from grants.gov, call them right away. Don't assume it's all is well until you get the email. Okay, so why do people get rejected? We've talked about this a little bit already. Invalid DUNS number. Password's not right. You're not authorized to submit. There was a virus. I think they fixed up a lot of the viruses. Or your SAM registration is not up to date. Again, be very careful about that. Again, electronic submission waivers. You cannot just get a waiver just because you don't feel like learning about the grants.gov process. You have to have good cause. And in other words, a lot of times people do get waivers granted because they don't have reliable internet, as the slide says, especially up in Alaska, but not only in Alaska. I know other places have the same. If you've been granted a waiver of the electronic submission, you do not have extra time to submit it. Your application must be received by the area office, in paper this is, by 5 o'clock, the time zone of the area office that you're submitting the application to. You will get, if you request the waiver, you'll get a letter that explains that. We are now, last year we had 15 days. In other words, you had to submit the request 15 days before the application deadline date. We are now being a little bit more flexible with that and providing you with, you can submit the waiver request up to 7 days. If you're starting to do this 2 weeks ahead of time and it really looks bad, and part of your problem is that you cannot get through on the internet, or you having storms or whatever, ask for the waiver. The waiver gets sent to the area ONAP administrator. You have to say why. It might not be granted if you don't say why. Okay. You cannot submit a request for a waiver over the phone. You gotta submit a request. What do you submit? The NOFA is very specific about what to submit for what type of project. A lot of the things are submitted for all types of projects. What's different this year is that if you are going to submit an application for both categories of funding, not only do you submit one narrative for Category 1, you submit another narrative for Category 2. You can cut and paste if it's the same project, but you have to submit 2 narratives. You also, to help the reviewers and yourself, submit 2 one-page summaries. So if you're submitting a $600,000 for a road over here and a $400,000 grant for mold over here, that's the cap nationwide for mold, 2 of each of those. You do not have to submit 2 standard form 424. This is the main form that goes through grants.gov. Every federal agency, every applicant for every federal program uses this. 1 SF 424 assigned. 1 HUD 2880. That's that disclosure report that nobody really knows what it's for. But you must complete it. You have to submit a budget. That's this form, the cost summary form. We spell out here what planning and admin can't and can include. You want to submit 2 budgets if you're submitting more than 1. Let's go back. If you are proposing, you get a lot of funds. You're eligible for a lot of funds from ICDBG based on the size of your tribe. And you're going to submit 5 projects, all infrastructure, let's say, 5 budgets. If you're submitting an application for category 1 for infrastructure and category 2 for mold, 2 budgets. If you're submitting, in other words, it seems like there's going to be a lot of budgets, and it might be if you're really big and submitting for both. But it really helps at the review level to know that the funds are going to be used what they want to be funded for. So don't just submit 1 budget for all grants or all projects. 2 separate budgets, especially if you're doing category 1 and category 2. And on these budget forms, you should show how much money you're contributing. It's spelled out in there. You want to do a resolution on citizen participation. If you're doing an application and it's going to include mold, you want to indicate that the community has been asked if it wants to remediate the mold. Don't just submit one tribal resolution that says, yeah, we're building a road, we want to build a road. You want to say, we have consulted and we've asked and we want to do mold remediation and we want to do infrastructure with these 2 categories. If required, or if a map is not essential, but we like to see a map so we can see if we've thought that out. We're going to need to know that you're going to serve low and moderate income families. We'll talk about that a little bit more in rating factor 2, but you are going to have to show that. Then we're going to talk a little bit about how do you show that low and moderate income benefit. If you're doing a community facility, you have to show not that every single person is low and moderate income, which is below 80% of median, but that at least 51% are. This is where you're going to use the data that Ben is going to post on that website. Again, you can use the information there, or you can do your own survey, as we described a little bit earlier, but you have to meet all the criteria of that section of the NOFA, and it's got to be statistically reliable, it's got to be verifiable, it's got to include this, it's got to, you have to do the whole thing. But only 51%, you have to show that at least 51% in that area will be below 80% of the median. Then if you're going to do a project that's going to serve a limited clientele, you don't have to submit all the data. We're going to assume that everybody in the homeless shelter is going to be, everybody is going to be over 50. In other words, you will pass this test. We presume that more than 51% will be low and moderate income. And some examples of some of the clientele that we'll consider to be low and moderate income are abused children, battered spouses, elderly persons, homeless persons, persons with AIDS, migrant workers, etc. What we've decided this year is if the eligibility of that particular project is known to be below 50, and very low income or low income, then you don't necessarily have to submit any information. We will assume that they will be that, and they'll be 100%. But to get the full 12 points, this is a little bit of a distinction. You will pass the low and moderate income benefit test if you're serving battered spouses or homeless people, a limited clientele. But to get the full points for this type of project later, when we're in rating factor 2, you're going to have to show that more are low and moderate income. There's a nuance there, so I want to make that clear. You're not going to get full points just because you're serving a limited clientele. So then we go to housing. Let me check my time. This is the type of housing you can do. All units, as I've said, have to be occupied by low and moderate income persons. If there's more than 2 units in the facility, at least 51% have to be occupied by low and moderate income. Where 2 or more buildings are located on the same property, the group buildings are considered a single structure. And for rental housing, the rents have to be affordable to low and moderate income households, and the grantee must adopt and make public its standards for determining affordable rent. So, in other words, just because it's going to be occupied by a low and moderate income household, we want to know that that particular household can afford it. How are you going to measure low and moderate income for job creation? It's a little bit trickier here. Again, this is all spelled out in the NOFA. You have to show that 51% of the jobs created are available by low and moderate income. We'll assume that they are if, and this is where the information from Ben, it's not just Ben's, but the census information he will post will come in handy. A person will be assumed to be low and moderate income if she resides within a census tract where not less than 70% of the residents have incomes at or below 80% of the area median, or if he resides in a census tract that is an empowerment zone or enterprise community. For an activity that creates jobs, the grantee must document that at least 51% of the jobs will be held by or available to low and moderate income persons. You also have to show that if there's you want to show that you're retaining jobs, you have to show that the jobs would actually be lost without this ICDBG assistance. So it's quite specific in the NOFA about what that requires and what that means. So I would urge you to look at that. Again, here we're talking a little bit more about what you need to submit when you submit your own independent verification of low mod income. I think this is on an earlier slide, but just to repeat, you want to show that that the information is all explained and all there, and I'm thinking that's a repeat slide. I apologize. I think we talked a little bit before about code of conduct. You need to have a code of conduct for your project. All HUD grantees have to show that they're being fair and just and doing the right thing when it comes to awarding funds at the local level. If you do not see your code of conduct posted on the code of conduct site that is in the general section, you need to submit it with your application, or if your code of conduct changed. Again, we talked about the lobbying form. Only if you're a state tribe do you have to submit that. There is a fax form that is also downloaded when you download your application. You do have to submit that form. I know it seems silly, but you have to submit it even if you are not faxing anything. Sometimes I think a lot of people have learned that faxing attachments to their applications isn't always a good thing, because sometimes, unless you're very careful about it, they're not always matched up. You can fax things, or you can attach them when you submit your application electronically. It's up to you, but if you fax something, make sure you use the HUD fax form as the cover sheet, and you match it up to the application information you downloaded. Okay, now we're going to go to rating factors. and I'm going to take a sip of my tea. They've changed a little bit from 2013, not too much. There are still 5, pretty much the same as they've always been. And there's some sub-factor changes within each, so we will go through that. There is a table in the NOFA, like there always is, in section 5A2, that breaks it down. Now the NOFA table used to break it down between new applicants and current applicants. Now it has category 1 current applicants and category 1 new, category 2 current, category 2 new. So it's a treasure hunt, but it's all in there. Interestingly, in 2014, we told you that already, there are bonus points. This is the first year we've ever had bonus points. I do not think the bonus point is going to have too much of an impact this year because there are 5 promise zones in the United States to date. This is a White House initiative. There will be another round of promise zones. To date, there is only 1 promise zone in a tribal area, and that is in Oklahoma. The Choctaw Nation has been designated a promise zone. So what will be interesting is that to get the 2 bonus points in your application, you must submit a letter from the lead organization of the zone that indicates that the application you're submitting through ICDBG will help the promise zone. So that is how that's worked out, spelled out. Again, I don't know if the promise zones will be designated by the time your applications are due. I do not think so. There is a promise zone website, and you can go there and find out more about that. It's listed there on the 3rd bullet. We will be working with the Oklahoma, with Southern Plains, on how to implement this when it comes to the Choctaw. But it will affect very few people, so the rest of you will not be probably eligible for those 2 bonus points, at least this year. Like always, there's a minimum score of 70 points to get funded. The cutoff for most area ONAPs is much higher, and the points, as I mentioned earlier, will vary if you're a current or a new applicant. What I did not say earlier, well, I'll say it later. Rating factor 1. This is the same rating factor we've had for a long time. There are now 33 points for this particular category. If you are funded this year, your progress will be measured for all the years that you're open. If you were funded in past years, within this factor, we are going to look at your progress or your lack of progress for this year, for those years. We'll talk about that too. You want to, in your application, talk about how successful you've been in projects of similar type that you're applying for. So if you're applying for a housing project, don't say that you've built a lot of roads and you've done them on time. You want to say you've rehabbed housing, you've rehabbed it fast, you've been successful. You want to show that you've been successful and met your goals in past years. Again, a new applicant, we're going to rate whether you're new or you're a current applicant. A new applicant is one that's either never applied for an ICDBG or whose prior grants have been closed for more than 12 months. And current grantees are those that are currently administering them. So within each factor, there are sub-factors and different amount of sub-factors in each factor. Sub-factor 1 within this first factor is 14 points for current grantees and 30 points for new grantees, and it applies to all applicants. This applies to, when I say all applicants, it's new and current. We want to see that you do possess, or that you can possess, the capacity to carry out the kind of project you were going to do, and you want to identify who will administer it. It's important that you talk about all the key players. We don't just want to know the director, we want to know who's going to manage it. We want to know who's going to work on the financial aspects of it. We want to know, how is this project going to be successful? You can include summaries of qualifications and past experiences of the staff, descriptions of their responsibilities, letters of endorsement. Put this all in your narrative and highlight each team member's experience, showing their relevant, recent, and successful experience. We don't want resumes, but if we want to talk about what kind of things they want to be able, or they are going to have to do, that's good. But we don't necessarily want resumes. So that's subfactor 1. Subfactor 2. Oh, sorry, this is all the same. I was a little ahead of myself. Okay, subfactor 1, that was 1A. Subfactor 1B. I know there's lots of little numbers. This is the breakdown. If you're a current grantee, you can get 3 points. If you're new, you can get 8. This is your implementation plan. There is a form for this. It's the HUD 4125. It's one of the forms you must submit. If you as the more specific you can get in this, the better. When are you going to start it? What are the steps? When are you going to finish it? Again, if you're going to submit requests for 2 projects, we want to see 2 plans. If you're submitting 2 categories, requests for 2 categories, we want to see 2 plans. Don't just rely on this particular form. Spell it out in your narrative also. Any kind of narrative supplementation will be good, but we want to see both. This year, for the first time, we are going to give maximum points. We don't have breakdowns, but we're going to give maximum points which is 8 or 3, to projects that can start within 180 days. We picked 180 days because that is the same term that you have to, by which you must come up with your match. We are very interested in getting projects started. I know there may be some concern about different regions of the country, what this will do, but the more information that you can demonstrate, include, that will demonstrate that you have thought out some things. Do you have your environmental work done? Do you have site approval? Do you have plans? Do you have, are you ready to go, or are you going to be starting from scratch? We really want to, and this came from higher up within ONAP, we do want to see that projects are ready to go and can start fast. So this is in the NOFA this year. It is going to stay in the NOFA this year, so I urge you to figure out how you can show that you are going to be able to get your project started. It doesn't have to be finished, but it has to be started. So I just want to highlight that because that is a new thing. Financial management, the points are there. We want to make sure that you are complying with the HUD criteria and the ICDBG regulations when it comes to financial management. We want to know if you have any audit findings, if they're serious or significant. We want to know if you don't have to have an audit, or that if you're supposed to and you just don't have it, that we have a letter from somebody that is spelling that out, that you do comply with regulatory requirements. If you're not required to have an audit, we want you to tell us that as well. So that audits are described here, but they're going to also be described later. This is for any applicant. This is for new, this is for current, this is for anybody. We want to know that you've submitted your audits on time, and if not, have you taken steps to remedy that? Subfactor 1D is procurement and contract management. Again, this is a subfactor we've had for a long time, and this has not changed too much. How do your policies and procedures meet these requirements? Do you have any findings related to this? Where are you with that? If you don't have a current audit, don't need one, please tell us that. Again, not too many changes here, but that's something you want to look at. Then we come to past performance. We've increased the points here to 19 points for current grantees, and this only applies to current grantees. We are going to evaluate your experience in producing products and reports according to timelines in your programs. And we're going to look at the information that we have on file. You can tell us something if you want, but we are going to look at what we have in the area office records about, did you submit, did you meet these goals? There is a change in the implementation expenditure section. Points are going to vary based on how timely you've been in meeting the timeframes of your previous implementation schedules, how you've met the goals, and we also are going to look at how much money you have in locks. To get the full 7 points here, you will have had to have no more than 35% of the total funds in all your open grants in your locks account. This is how it is this year. I've heard some concerns about this. This is how we're going. If you you will get fewer points if you have more than 35% of your total funds awarded in locks. There really is a push to get funds spent. Do your best with this. Discuss it at your area ONAP training. But this is how it is right now. We really want to get the funds spent quickly, and we figured locks was the best way to look at that. See what you can do with that. That is new, so I urge you to look at that and see what money you have, what money hasn't been spent, can money be spent, etc. That is new. Reports, we've always asked you to, we're always going to look at how you've submitted your reports. These are your ACER reports and your federal financial reports. You will get fewer points the later they are. That has not changed. Same thing with closeouts. We're going to look at all your open grants in closeouts. If you've submitted your documents by the required deadlines for those. And in closeouts, that's 90 days after the deadline has been, the criteria in the reg has been met. And audits, we were going to make sure you've submitted annual audits for the last 2 audit periods in accordance with ICDBG requirements and the OMB circulars. Or if you've received an extension, we will know that. If you're not required to submit one, you have to tell us again. We're also going to look at your findings. We're going to look at findings not only in ICDBG, but we're going to look at findings in IHBG. That is a difference. But I wanted to just point that out also. Another new criteria. As I mentioned briefly in the beginning, we've heard year after year, or in recent years, certainly, that the same applicants get the funds year after year, and small tribes, some tribes, tribes here, tribes there, do not get funding. Now, obviously, you have to submit a good application to get funded, but we know that there are sometimes handicaps. We are, this year, going to be providing points to applicants who have not received a grant in recent years. And it applies to the tribe or the tribal organization that's submitting the grant. So in other words, if a TDHE or the organization got a grant on behalf of the tribe, you will not get the points that I'm going to discuss. If you did not receive a grant in the last 3 years, you will get 3 points. If you did not receive a grant in the last 2 NOFA cycles, that's what I mean when I say years, NOFA cycles, you will receive 2 points. And in the last year you didn't get any, you will receive 1 point. That's 3 points you can possibly get. It's going to change the mix. It's going to change the formula. We'll see how it goes this year. That is how it's going to go this year. We're making a lot of changes in the NOFA this year. We're going to see how this goes. We're going to see what this does and how it plays itself out. But we do believe that we would like the funds to be spread out to all the needy tribes that submit good applications. Okay, I have about 25 minutes, so I'm going to talk about rating factor 2. This has not changed too much. You want to show that your application in subfactor 1 is meeting the needs and will improve the viability of the community. Why is it essential? Why is it critical? How is it? What we did a few years ago is we added some language to talk about how the project is critical to the cultural, social, or economic viability of the community. Don't just say, yeah, we need it. There's some people on our waiting list. Well, what about it? I mean, why is this important? Then we're going to rate the project benefit in subfactor 2 for up to 12 points on the type of project that you are applying for. All of them will be up to 12 points, but it will vary. So for public facilities and improvements, you can get up to 12 points. As Ben discussed earlier, there are several options for determining the need. We're going to use CDBG data, ACS, or your own information that you submit. But we are also, and we're going to give you the updated the updated tables that we gave you in recent years. Up to 12 points for this. And again, the points will go down based on the number of people that are low and moderate income in your area. So remember before we talked about thresholds. To meet a threshold, well, public facilities don't have a threshold, never mind. But we're going to look at, you'll get up to 12 points, and I think here I have it spelled out. Yes, I do. If at least 85% are your low and moderate income in the area, you'll get 12, and then it goes down to less than 55%, you don't get any. Points are given based on the percent of the targeted population that's going to benefit, and make sure your application documents who will be benefiting. So that's a public facility project. It's somewhat similar in economic development. However, the beneficiaries are persons served, employed by the project, who got the jobs, who retained the jobs. Again, you could submit the data on that website or other data. And again, the points are going to be, for this type of project, similar to those for public facilities projects. Subfactor 2C is where the housing needs table comes into play. We're going to look at the 2014 IHBG formula data. And this is what we always do. We sometimes use the year before IHBG final numbers for need, but this year we had the 14 data. At the same time, we had the 14 NOFA, so we're using the 14 data, and there's a needs chart there, and it spells out if there's no need, or if there's, it's all spelled out right in there, and you'll see the points range from 12 points, again, down to 0. It's posted. If you can't find it, we can get it to you, but it should be right there. So that's not too different. We haven't changed the percentages or the ratios there. We just use the data from 14. This will also apply to the mold. We're going to use the same tables for the mold. Okay, soundness of approach. Up to 33 points. Not too many differences here from last year. You want to show, why is this project going to be good? Why is it going to be effective? How is it going to enhance the viability, et cetera? And then how are you going to sustain it? So in other words, the people that you said you were the population you were going to serve in factor 2, the same people you're going to serve here. So there's several subfactors here as well. You're going to describe, there are 4. The points a little bit different than they were last year perhaps, but the HUD policy priorities went down to 2. For subfactor 1, up to 10 points. You want to describe your project. Again, how it's going to identify the need. How will the viability be improved? If you're going to propose housing construction or a public facility, you have to include cost savings due to program design, or construction methods, don't forget that. It can be solar energy, unique materials, et cetera, like that. For land acquisition, you can do that under this. For land acquisition to support new housing, you have to show a reasonable benefit, a reasonable ratio, I'm sorry, between the number of net usable acres to be acquired and the number of low and moderate income households that will benefit. And you cannot just keep getting land year after year. In other words, you cannot land bank under this program. We do not like that. Budget and cost estimates, as I indicated earlier, we want to have it on the form, but here's where in the narrative you can explain it. We want it broken down by line item, planning and admin. If you're going to use the money for admin, you need to say it. If you're not, don't use it for that. Who prepared the cost estimates? That's something people often forget. We'd like to see who put this together and what are their qualifications. We're going to look at how thorough the budget is, how complete it is it reasonable, and are all the major costs included? I was trying to think of an example off the top of my head, but that'll take too long, and I don't have long. Where appropriate, you want to include outside cost estimates for large-priced items. And again, you don't want to rely solely on that budget form 4123. Here's your chance to supplement what the form says. You don't have to write the whole budget down, but if anything would be helpful, add it there. The HUD policy priorities continue to present a conundrum to our program, I think. I don't know that everybody would think that, but we try to pick, we are always told by the others in HUD that we are required, not just us, HUD programs are required to select from several HUD policies which ones best fit their program. So, for example, one that we did not pick was affirmatively furthering fair housing. We tried to pick HUD policy priorities that are spelled out in the general section that most closely fit with the types of things that we can do with ICDBG. So you see the two we have chosen for ICDBG this year, 1 point each, are promote economic development and economic resilience, and increase energy efficiency and health and safety of homes, 1 point each. So you want to include in your narrative which one of those you're going to address, or both, and how. You must describe it. You can't just say, I'm going to promote economic development. I'm going to use energy efficient things. I'm going to face east. You know, you have to spell it out and say what you're going to do. We're not going to automatically give you the points. Not all projects fit these. Do your best. I know that there are some breakdowns within these that might fit better. Do your best with these. Let's discuss it with your area ONAPs. They are not perfect. Not everybody will be able to get them, but we want to know if you're going to do it, or if you want to get the point, you have to show that you're going to do it somehow. Okay, so for example, I went a little ahead of myself. How are you going to create jobs? Well, I think most of your projects will create some kind of jobs. Are you going to create business opportunities? Maybe not as much. Are you going to create a flow of investment? I don't know. I suspect, I don't know, maybe I'm getting into creating and giving you advice about how to write your application, so I better not. And then for the energy efficiency one, are you going to use a green building standard, which is explained in the general section? What about a renewable energy standard? There's some crossover, but all of those are spelled out in the general section and a little bit in our NOFA. Okay, then how are you going to sustain the project? We don't just want to fund a project, give you the money, get a report once in a while, and then hope that you're going to build it and keep it going. I mean, this is federal money, your federal money, my federal money. How are you going to sustain it? So we want to see how you are. So we want to, how is it going to proceed, your project, and how can you sustain it? So for public facilities, you can get up to 12 points for this sub-factor. We need to see an O&M plan, operations and maintenance plan, and we want to know that the tribe, or if it's a tribal entity, has committed the funds for this plan and has a plan. You don't have to submit the plan, but we want to know that you really are serious about it. It can be in a tribal resolution, it can be in a statement, but we want to know that you have the funds for this, and we want to know that you are going to be including criteria that is spelled out in the NOFA about what needs to be in the plan for which type of project. So for example, continuing in this vein, you have to show how you're going to maintain the project if it starts falling apart, how you're going to repair it, how you're going to insure it, how you're going to keep it secure from vandalism or what have you, and what about replacement reserves? What are the cost breakdowns for those? Again, not every project's going to need every single aspect of that, but the NOFA spells out what you do. And if you are building a building and you're going to have a lot of services being provided in that building, we want to see that there are commitments for those services. Okay, so we're on B. If you're proposing a housing project, you have to identify the maintenance and responsibilities and who's going to be responsible for them. In some cases, it will be the owner of the property. In some cases, it's the tribe. In some cases, it's the TDHE. Who is going to be doing it? If the tribe is, we want to see, or the TDHE, we want to, or another, whoever, we want to see a commitment. There is a commitment of dollars. There is a commitment to that effect. We want to see as much detail here, too. You can't just say, yep, we're going to maintain it. Economic development projects, same thing. In addition to the feasibility analysis that you needed to do to get through the threshold, we want to know how the project, how is it going to operate, why you need it, and how it's going to succeed. You will get 12 points here. Remember I told you there's a difference between how you're looked at in threshold versus how you're looked at for the points. You will get 12 points if you submit all of the information requested in this section. And evidence is provided that the project's chance for financial success is excellent. Remember, excuse me, you had to show for threshold that it was reasonable. Now you have to show that it's excellent to get 12 points. So it's a little bit higher standard. So look at that. Micro enterprises. Same thing, you need to show how it's going to operate. What are you going to provide in terms of assistance? How you're going to select applicants for these micro enterprise programs, how you're going to analyze business plans. Again, I mentioned we don't see too much of these. It would be good to see some more, but we don't. But it's all spelled out there. I'm not saying apply for this kind of project. I would never say that. I'm just observing. Subfactor 4E, land acquisition to support new housing. Remember, no land banking. We talked a little bit about if you're going to get land, it has to have access to potable drinking water at a reasonable cost, access to utilities, etc. Oh, it's all spelled out on that slide. And the investigation to determine that has to be done by a qualified independent entity. So you have to show that somebody, you had an evaluation done, an assessment done. Okay, we're almost done with rating factors. Rating factor 4 is leveraging. I do not think this has changed at all. Maybe a word here or two, but same thing, 8 points. The more money you bring to the table, the more points you get. Project costs are the total cost to implement the project and include both the requested ICDBG amount and the allowable non-ICDBG resources. So here's a table. Less than 4% of the total cost, you're going to get 0 points. But if you bring 25% or more, you're going to get all the way up to 8 points. Look at the NOFA, see what you can do. The NOFA also spells out in great detail what is allowable as leverage, tribal funds, public funds, IHBG, donated goods, land. With the exception of land acquisition, funds expended on the project prior to submission of the application cannot be counted as leverage. So let me say that again. Funds expended on the project prior to submission of the application cannot count as leverage. It has to be going forward. Environmental review requirements apply to the commitment or use of both ICDBG and non-ICDBG funds in an ICDBG leverage, in a leverage project. There are some disallowed leverage, indirect admin costs, your operation and maintenance costs, the value of the existing facility. If you're going to expand the facility, which is your project, you're going to expand the facility, you can't count the value of the one you have. So you want to submit the information with your application. You want to submit a written statement that identifies and commits the funds. You can submit MOUs. You can submit letterhead. We want to know if it's from the, we want to see it on the letterhead of the entity that's providing it. We want to see, must include the donor's organization, the resources proposed, the dollar amount, and then the NOFA also spells out how you can value the land. We want to see commitment within 6 months of the leverage. We've changed that a little bit, not the 6 months, but we've made it a little bit more flexible in terms of if you can't get leverage from the first source, you may be able to get it from another. We want to see leverage. We want to see that amount. But we want to see a letter from the entity that says why the commitment can't be made and when it can be made. Little bit of a change there. Same thing for factor 5. This one is one that all NOFAs have to have. We have to. Some of them have different titles, but this is about how to measure what you've done. So in other words, the first sub-factor, we want to how is you coordinate this grant with everybody else in your project? How's this working in the bigger picture? Or is it just an isolated thing standing on the side and nobody else is helping you out? Is there a comprehensive plan? Does this fit into it? What other organizations are going to support you that aren't giving you leverage? So that's in particular what we talk about here. Again, you don't want to include your leverage partners, but if you're working with a lot of social service agencies and they're all dying for you to get this building built, well then write that in there. Then we're going to look at outputs and outcomes. Remember the old days, some of you may remember a few years ago, we had to do what's called a logic model, which was an Excel form with drop downs. Well, we don't have to do that now, but we do have to talk about what are you going to do? How many houses? How many jobs? How many square feet? The type of output you're going to put in your narrative, this is all going to be in your narrative now, is going to be based on the type of project you are doing. In other words, if you're doing economic development, I guess you'd be doing jobs. If you're doing houses rehab, if you're going to rehab houses, you're not going to talk about how many businesses were assisted. So it's pretty intuitive. You can also put any other type of output in here, but we want to see as specific as you can. How are they going to be measurable? If you said 10 in 5 years, are we able, that's measurable. We could see if you did 10. But it's got to be measurable. It should be clear. So we're going to have to monitor this because you're going to have to put this in your reports. Same thing with outcomes. Outcomes are a little bit broader. They're what does it mean? What happened as a result? Not just how many units you built. Families aren't living in substandard housing now. They have more income. They have better quality of life. The lead is removed. They're more self-sufficient. So those are what we're talking about when we come to outcomes. You can pick those that are in the NOFA and you say you're going to do them if they fit. But if they don't fit, we want to see some other outcomes. Okay, so you submitted your application, and I'm almost done. What does HUD do? Well, they come to headquarters. I get them, and a colleague gets them. Diane will get them, and we will send them out to you. We will send them out to you. We will send them to the area ONAPs. They do the reviews. They will review category 1. We will review category 2. We will screen it. Did you submit all the forms? Are you eligible? If not, you're out. Is the project eligible? You're building a church? Nope. Does it have everything you have to submit? Yes. Does it look like you're going to serve 70%? Yep. Okay. Did you meet threshold? Then we're going to look at your thresholds. We're going to look at the past performance based on what we have and anything you've said. We're going to rate you based on the points I've discussed. Did you meet minimum points? If you didn't even get 70 points, we're not even going to, that's the end. I also didn't say, but if you don't get 15 points in rating factor 1 for capacity, we'll stop right there. Forgot to mention that. That is true. Then we're going to rank you. We're going to look and see, okay, we're going to all of them together. We're going to look. We're going to, if there's ties, the NOFA spells out how to do this. If you could get funded and do what you need to do, but another application couldn't, we'll fund you. That spells out. Technical deficiencies, a little concern. If you forgot to sign something, we'll consider that. If you forgot a major form, I don't think so. We will send you a letter, the area office will, if it's considered a technical deficiency, and we will wait. That doesn't mean you got the grant. It means that we need some more info. If you don't respond, you don't, that's it. Same thing with pre-award requirements. Sometimes we don't know enough information, but we need to check something. We're trying to figure something out. Again, if you don't respond to the things that we ask you in these letters, that's it. Or if you don't respond in the right way. Big question about errors. If you did not get funded, there is no appeal. The only thing that you can appeal is whether we added the points up wrong. If you don't like how we rated you, or if you don't like that we said you didn't meet threshold, there is no appeal. There is no appeal. There is no appeal. You can have a debriefing. The NOFA spells out how to have a debriefing. You can get your rating forms. Occasionally, HUD makes a mistake. Very rarely. They reviewed the wrong application from the wrong year. That was a HUD mistake. That's really a HUD mistake. So sometimes you might get funded. But just if you didn't like our review, then you don't. Again, we have to get Congress gets to announce the awards. We said in the NOFA we expected to make the awards by the end of the fiscal year. We will try our best to do that. It may be October. Sometimes we'll put special conditions in your grant agreement that says you have to do this or we'll pull the money back. You will have to report if you get the grant. You'll have to do a quarterly financial report. Many of you know about those. You will have to do an annual report, which is a narrative report. Did you meet your outputs? You'll have to show minority businesses. And then if you're done, you have to do a closeout report. All of this is spelled out in the NOFA. If you have general questions, I suggest you contact your area ONAP. I'm almost certain all of you know who those are. If you have electronic submission questions, remember, call the help desk. The number's on the screen. Write the help desk. These are the numbers for the area ONAPs. Again, I assume most of you that are watching know your contacts in the area ONAPs. We cannot help you write your application. We can only tell you what the NOFA says and asks for. We can give you general suggestions. There will be additional NOFA training, as I've intimated so far during this session. I happen to know when they are now, unlike the slide says. Alaska, Eastern Woodlands, and Northwest will have their NOFA training on July 1st. Southern Plains on July 7th. Southwest on July 8th. Northern Plains will have 2 days on July 9th and 10th. Again, I'm not going to do it again because I'm getting the cutoff thing. There's also online training about different ways to apply for ICDBG. It's a little bit old, but there is that on our website. In closing, I would like to remind you all that you have to submit your application electronically unless you get a waiver up to 7 days before the due date. You must register long in advance of the time you submit your electronic application. Applications are due on July 29th, 1 minute before midnight. And you should not submit, no, you should, I apologize, you should submit your application, if you possibly can, well in advance of the application deadline. I thank you for your attention. We're going to take a little bit of a break, 10 minutes, maybe 15. We will come back with a panel to talk about the new opportunity for mold remediation and prevention. So thank you, and you also can email me. I don't think my email's on the screen, but my email address is with the information on the NOFA download. But I urge you to attend the NOFA training by your area own app, and they should be able to answer most of your questions. Thank you.